Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big ideas. And today, we've got one that really turns common sense completely on its head.
So what if I told you that the best way to save a beehive from a brutal winter wasn't to give it more air, but to pretty much suffocate it? I know, it sounds crazy, but today we're diving into this super radical idea in beekeeping that challenges, well, everything we thought we knew about how hives should breathe. Could fresh air actually be a killer? All right, so first up, let's talk about the old way of thinking. The long-held belief about how you're supposed to help bees get through the winter.
Okay, so for decades, right, the advice has always been the same. You gotta ventilate your hives from the top. The whole idea was to get rid of all that moisture and what everyone called bad air, carbon dioxide. You don't want the bees getting damp or suffocating. Makes sense? But this creates a massive energy problem. Think about it. It's like leaving a window wide open in your house all winter long. Your furnace would be running nonstop, right? Well, for bees, they are the furnace, and their fuel is honey. So all that constant work just to stay warm, it just torches their food supply. And sadly, a lot of colonies end up starving to death.
But this whole idea, it just didn't sit right with one particular beekeeper. And this guy wasn't just anywhere. He was in a place with some of the longest, coldest winters you can imagine. That beekeeper's name is Etienne Tardif, and he's way up in Canada's Yukon, where winter isn't a few months, it's like 8 months long, and the temperatures just plummet. And what he saw was that his bees were not just fine, they were actually thriving in hives that had almost no ventilation. And that one simple observation kicked off a whole decade of trying to figure out why. He wasn't just taking the old rules at face value. He was asking a bigger question. Have we completely misunderstood what bees actually need? And look, this wasn't just some gut feeling. Tardiff basically turned his beehives into these high-tech labs. For more than 10 years, he was packing them with sensors. We're talking up to 35 sensors in just one hive, measuring everything: temperature, humidity, and the big one, carbon dioxide levels. It was like he was putting a stethoscope on the hive, He was listening to what the bees were doing, not what some old book said they should be doing. And the results were just, wow. His colonies were crushing these brutal Yukon winters, and they were barely touching their honey supply to do it. So what was their secret? Well, what Tardiff discovered is gonna blow your mind. It turns out that high levels of CO2, the very thing we thought was bad air, wasn't a problem at all. It was actually the bees' secret weapon for surviving the winter. The whole thing hinges on a biological state called hypoxia. Okay, so when a hive is sealed up tight, the CO2 from the bees just breathing builds up and up. This naturally brings the oxygen levels down, and that's the trigger. It causes this dramatic slowdown in the bees' metabolism. And it's not like they're suffocating, not at all. It's more like they're entering a state of deep energy-saving meditation. You might hear it called torpor. So what does this do? Well, it allows the bees to save a ton of energy. Instead of shivering and vibrating their muscles all winter to stay warm, which just burned through honey like crazy, this high CO2 environment lets them chill out in this ultra-low energy state. They're basically putting themselves in a controlled slowdown, saving all that precious food for the long, cold months. And the results are they're staggering, really. Get this. Using this method, Tardiff found that a small 5-frame colony could make it through a 7 or 8-month Arctic winter on just 10 pounds of honey. 10 pounds. I mean, for any beekeepers out there, you know that colonies in much milder places can burn through way more than that in a much shorter winter. That number is absolutely revolutionary. It proves the bees are playing a completely different game. Okay, so how do you actually do this? How does this idea translate into a real-world beehive? Well, it's all about a design called the condensing hive. The principle behind the condensing hive is actually pretty simple, but it's totally brilliant. First, you pack heavy insulation on top of the hive. We're talking R40, the kind of stuff you'd put in your attic. This traps all that heat that wants to rise. Then, and this is key, you completely seal off any ventilation at the top. No holes, no gaps. The only way for air to get in and out is through a single entranceway down at the bottom. And what this does is it turns the hive into its own little self-regulating ecosystem. And the science behind this is so cool. So the condensing hive runs on natural convection. That just means slow, gentle air currents that are moved by tiny differences in temperature. For the bees, this is super low energy. Now compare that to a typical top-vented hive. That thing acts like a chimney, just constantly sucking all the warm air out, which forces the bees to work way, way harder to stay warm. And the worst-case scenario? That's when the bees have to actively fan their wings to control the temperature. That's just a massive energy drain. So you can see this is about so much more than just saving honey. This completely changes how we think about the fundamental nature of a beehive.
And this chart really drives the point home, doesn't it? Look at the difference. Bees in one of these sealed, insulated condensing hives use so much less honey over a crazy long and cold winter than bees in vented hives do over much shorter, milder ones. It's wild. For all these years, we thought we were helping them by giving them fresh air, but what we were actually doing was making them work themselves to exhaustion, just burning through their winter food. And the benefits just keep stacking up. First, a stable environment means less stress for the bees. And that moisture we were so worried about, it actually condenses on the walls, giving the bees a crucial source of water when the winter air is bone dry. But here's the real kicker, the absolute game changer. Early research suggests that these high CO2 levels are actually toxic to the veroa mites. You know, the #1 parasite that's been devastating bee colonies all over the world. So this environment doesn't just help them survive the winter, it might actually help them fight off their biggest enemy.
Now, this method is powerful, but it's not totally foolproof. There is one catch: a sudden, rapid warm-up outside. If the temperature spikes really fast, the bees can't adjust quickly enough, and the CO2 levels can become dangerous. This is something Tardiff learned the hard way. But he found a simple fix. You just have to make sure the bottom entrance is big enough so the bees can manage the airflow themselves if things start to get a little too toasty in there.
So think about it. This whole amazing discovery came from someone questioning what everyone thought was a problem, that CO2 and moisture buildup. But it turns out it wasn't a problem. It was the bees' own incredibly elegant solution. And that really makes you wonder, right? What other natural problems are we trying to fix when maybe they're actually solutions in disguise? What else could we learn if we just stopped and listened to the answers that nature has developed over millions of years?